Chief Shipwright Xelthor stared at the holographic display, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession as he tried to process the data streaming before him. In his 3 centuries of analyzing spacecraft designs across the galaxy, he had never encountered anything quite like this. "Run the scans again," he ordered, his secondary vocal cords vibrating with tension. The junior analysts hurried to comply, their appendages dancing across the crystalline control surfaces of the Galactic Council's most advanced sensor array. The results remained unchanged. Hovering at the edge of human space was a vessel that by all rights shouldn't exist. The power readings alone violated 3 fundamental laws of thermodynamics. The structural integrity calculations suggested it should have collapsed into itself the moment it attempted faster-than-light travel. "Magnification, please," Xelthor requested, leaning forward as the image sharpened. The warship's hull bore the marks of multiple repairs, some of which appeared to be held together by what his database identified as duct tape, a primitive binding material that humans seemed pathologically obsessed with. Senior analyst Vectera floated closer, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with concern. "Sir, the weapon systems, they're generating energy signatures that our models insist are impossible. The main cannon appears to be powered by, is this reading correct? A modified beverage heating device. A coffee maker," Xelthor corrected, having spent enough time studying human culture to recognize their peculiar reliance on caffeine-based stimulants. "They've somehow integrated it into their weapons array." The room fell silent as a new set of readings appeared. The ship's reactor core was operating at 113% efficiency, a number that caused several of the younger analysts to emit distress pheromones. "That's not possible," Vectera whispered. "The universal constant for energy conversion clearly states." "I know what it states," Xelthor interrupted, his chromatophores darkening with frustration. "Just like I know that their shield harmonics should be tearing the ship apart instead of protecting it. Just like I know that their navigation system appears to be running on something our database identifies as a PlayStation 7. He gestured at the hologram, where the human vessel, designated SS Paradox with what he could only assume was intentional irony, continued its patrol pattern. The ship's movements defied conventional space-time mechanics, executing turns that should have liquefied its crew and accelerating in ways that suggested it was either ignoring inertia or had somehow convinced physics to look the other way. "Send the data to the Council," Xelthor decided, already dreading the reaction. "And prepare my personal research vessel. I need to see this abomination of engineering up close." "Sir," one of the junior analysts spoke up, their voice modulator quivering. "The Council's previous directives strictly forbid direct contact with human military vessels after the incident." Xelthor remembered the incident well. The last time Council engineers had attempted to study a human warship, they'd returned babbling about something called percussive maintenance and had to be rehabilitated after trying to repair a quantum computer by hitting it with a wrench. The Council's directives also assumed that the ships we're studying operate within the realm of physical possibility, Xelthor countered. "This vessel breaks every rule in our scientific database. If we don't understand how, we risk falling dangerously behind in our understanding of space warfare." As if to emphasize his point, the sensors detected a new energy spike from the paradox. The ship briefly phased out of normal spacetime, leaving behind what appeared to be a trail of coffee stains in the fabric of reality itself. "Contact their command," Xelthor ordered, straightening his ceremonial robes. "Tell them the Galactic Council's chief shipwright requests permission to conduct an engineering assessment." He paused, then added, "And someone find me everything we have on human coffee makers. I have a feeling we're going to need to understand how they work." The message was sent, and all 4 of Xelthor's hearts clenched as he waited for a response. Somewhere on that impossible ship was an explanation for how humans had managed to break reality itself, and he was going to find it. Assuming, of course, that the laws of physics didn't finally catch up with the HSS paradox and decide to take their revenge. The docking procedure itself should have been Excelsior's first clue that everything he knew about spacecraft operations was about to be challenged. The HSS Paradox's docking bay seemed to casually ignore the need for proper gravitational alignment, allowing their shuttle to land at what his instruments insisted was a physically impossible angle. "Welcome aboard." Captain Jake Morrison's voice boomed across the hangar bay as the alien delegation stepped out of their shuttle. The human commander stood with a relaxed posture that suggested either supreme confidence or blissful ignorance of how many laws of physics his ship was currently breaking. "I hope you don't mind the weird gravity in here. We had to get creative with the artificial gravity generators after last month's incident with the microwave." Zelthor's translator took a moment to process this statement. "Creative, with gravity generators?" he managed to ask, while his scientific team hurriedly calibrated their instruments. "Oh yeah," Morrison grinned, running a hand through his sandy blonde hair. "Turns out if you reverse the polarity of a microwave and run it through the ship's gravitational field harmonizers, you can create some pretty interesting effects. Makes loading cargo a breeze, though we did lose a few hamburgers to the ceiling before we got it right." Vectera, who had insisted on accompanying the inspection team, was already displaying signs of profound scientific distress. Her bioluminescent patterns were cycling through colors that Zelthor hadn't seen since the Great Physics Revision Crisis of 3157. "Captain," Zelthor began carefully, "our preliminary scans indicated some unusual design choices in your vessel's construction. As the Galactic Council's chief shipwright, I must ask, why everything works when it shouldn't?" Morrison finished, his grin widening. "Follow me to the bridge. Our chief engineer, Lieutenant Brooks, is dying to show you how we solved the antimatter containment problem using a modified coffee maker and some rubber bands." The journey to the bridge was an exercise in suppressing scientific panic. Every corridor they passed contained some new violation of established physical laws. A maintenance technician was fixing a quantum field generator with what appeared to be a hammer. Two ensigns were adjusting the ship's shield frequency by humming at it. And most disturbingly, a junior officer was calibrating the navigation array using what Zelthor's database identified as a Nintendo Switch Classic. "Here we are," Morrison announced as the bridge doors slid open with a cheerful ding. "Lieutenant Brooks, our guests have arrived." Amanda Brooks looked up from where she was adjusting something in the ship's main console using what appeared to be a paperclip and a piece of chewing gum. Her red hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her uniform bore several scorch marks that seemed to glow with concerning levels of quantum radiation. "Perfect timing," she exclaimed, standing up and wiping her hands on her already stained uniform. "I just finished recalibrating the reality dampeners. We were starting to phase through Thursday again." "Phase through Thursday?" Vectera's voice modulator cracked with confusion. "Yeah, it's a weird side effect of our faster-than-light drive," Brooks explained casually. "Turns out if you run a temporal field through a coffee maker's heating element, you can sort of skip around in space-time a bit. Really helps with fuel efficiency, though it plays hell with scheduling lunch breaks." Zelthor's primary brain was struggling to process this information, while his secondary brain was seriously considering a career change to interpretive dance. "Lieutenant, none of what you just said should be possible." "Oh, we get that a lot," Morrison chuckled, dropping into the captain's chair. "But you know what they say. Anything's possible with enough coffee, duct tape, and a complete disregard for what the universe says you can't do." As if to punctuate this statement, a nearby console sparked dramatically. A young ensign simply walked over and kicked it, causing the readings to immediately stabilize. "Percussive maintenance," Brooks explained proudly. "Works every time." Zelthor watched as his team of highly trained xenophysicists stared in horror at their scanning devices, which were now displaying readings that suggested the ship was simultaneously in 3 different dimensions, and possibly also in last Tuesday. He had a feeling this inspection was going to require a lot more than his standard report template, and possibly a complete rewrite of modern physics as they knew it. And this, Lieutenant Amanda Brooks announced with the enthusiasm of a child showing off a crayon masterpiece, is our main engineering bay. Zelthor and his team stood frozen in the doorway, their scientific instruments emitting a cacophony of warning beats. The massive chamber before them seemed to be actively arguing with the laws of thermodynamics. And winning. Is that a lava lamp controlling your quantum matrix? Vectera asked, her voice barely a whisper. Oh, good eye. Brooks beamed. We found out that the random motion of the wax bubbles creates the perfect quantum uncertainty field. Plus, it looks pretty cool during night shifts. She patted the oversized lava lamp, which was pulsing with colors that shouldn't exist in this dimension. The engineering bay was a maze of jury-rig solutions that would make any conventional engineer need immediate therapy. In one corner, a row of modified gaming consoles handled the ship's targeting systems. Their cooling fans had been replaced with what appeared to be desk fans from a 20th century office. Now this is my favorite part, Brooks continued, leading them to the central reactor core. We had some issues with antimatter containment until we figured out the coffee maker solution. The reactor core was a towering cylinder of swirling energy, surrounded by what appeared to be hundreds of modified coffee makers all working in perfect harmony. The smell of fresh brewed coffee permeated the air, along with an odd scent that Zelthor's sensors identified as vanilla caramel mocha. You see, Brooks explained, grabbing a fresh cup of coffee from one of the auxiliary containment units, we discovered that the steam pressure from brewing coffee creates a peculiar quantum resonance. Add a little creamer, and suddenly you've got a stable antimatter containment field that runs at 113% efficiency. But that's... One of the junior analysts stuttered. Impossible. Brooks finished, taking a sip of her reactor-brewed coffee. Yeah. We get that a lot. But here's the thing about impossible. It's really more of a suggestion than a rule. She led them to a workstation where Ensign Mike Thompson was recalibrating the shield harmonics using what appeared to be a modified electric guitar. The vibrations from the power cords helped stabilize the shield frequency. Brooks explained over the sound of a particularly impressive riff. Plus, it really helps with crew morale. The tour continued past a series of increasingly bewildering innovations. The ship's waste recycling system had been rebuilt using parts from a water park slide. The emergency backup generator was powered by what Brooks casually referred to as a perpetual motion machine they'd accidentally created while trying to build a better pizza oven. And this, Brooks said, stopping at a door marked Temporal Engineering Lab. Please knock last Tuesday. Is where we keep our experimental stuff. Experimental. Zelthor's secondary brain had already shut down in protest, and his primary brain was considering following suit. You mean everything we've seen so far isn't experimental? Oh no, those are all proven systems. Brooks laughed. In here is where we really get weird. We're working on a way to use synchronized cat purrs to generate wormholes. Still got some kinks to work out though. Last test turned half the lab into string theory. Vectera's scanning device finally gave up and displayed a blue screen of death. She stared at it for a moment before quietly placing it in a pocket. I think, she said carefully, we're going to need to revise our understanding of what constitutes possible. That's the spirit, Brooks exclaimed. Now, who wants to see how we use rubber ducks to detect cloaked enemy vessels? Fair warning. The ducks tend to quack in 5 dimensions, so you might want to plug your ears and your temporal lobes. As they followed Brooks deeper into the ship's impossible engine room, Zelthor couldn't help but wonder if perhaps the universe wasn't broken. Maybe it had just been waiting for humans to come along and show it how to have a little fun with the rules. The ship-wide alert system activated with what sounded suspiciously like a rubber duck squeak, followed by heavy metal guitar riffs. Lieutenant Brooks's eyes lit up with an unsettling gleam that Zelthor was beginning to recognize as the standard human response to impending disaster. Captain Morrison to engineering. The intercom crackled. We've got 3 Drachnid warships dropping out of hyperspace. Looks like they're feeling frisky. Drachnid warships. Vectera's bioluminescence paled to a sickly green. The most advanced military force in the Cygnus Arm. Oh good, Brooks exclaimed, already rushing to the main engineering console. I've been wanting to test our new probability drive. She kicked a nearby panel, causing several readouts to spring to life, each displaying numbers that made Selthor's various brains hurt. The engineering bay erupted into what appeared to be organized chaos. Ensign Thompson switched his electric guitar to what he called his combat riffs, somehow causing the shield harmonics to pulse in time with his power chords. Another engineer was rapidly rerouting power through the coffee makers, causing the antimatter containment field to glow with impossible colors. Battle stations, everyone. Morrison's voice boomed through the speakers. Let's show our guests how the paradox earned her name. Brooks turned to the alien delegation with an apologetic grin. You might want to hold onto something. Reality gets a bit flexible when we're in combat mode. Before Excelthor could ask what she meant by flexible, the ship's artificial gravity hiccuped. He found himself briefly floating while simultaneously feeling heavier than normal, an experience his vestibular system filed under "Never speak of this again." Drachnid vessels launching primary weapons, called out the tactical officer from the bridge. Standard quantum-locked plasma torpedoes. Perfect. Brooks shouted back, her fingers dancing across her console, initiating the Schrödinger override. Mike, give me something with a good bass line. The entire ship vibrated as Thompson launched into what humans apparently called a sick riff. The incoming torpedoes, designed to exist in a quantum-locked state that made them impossible to dodge or deflect, suddenly seemed confused about whether they existed at all. What did you do? Vectera asked, watching through a nearby viewport as the torpedoes phased in and out of reality. We convinced them they're both hits and misses until they look at themselves, Brooks explained cheerfully, while rerouting more power through what appeared to be a toaster. Quantum uncertainty on a macro scale. The torpedoes can't decide if they've hit us or not, so they sort of just give up. The ship shuddered as Captain Morrison executed a maneuver that should have turned everyone aboard into a fine paste. Instead, thanks to what Brooks called the inertial suggestion system, it merely felt like a gentle sway. All right, folks. Morrison's voice had taken on an almost gleeful tone. Time to show them our new main weapon. Lieutenant Brooks, is the reality hiccup cannon ready? Just a sec, Captain. Brooks called back, dumping 3 packets of sugar into the weapons system's primary coffee maker. Had to sweeten the deal. Zelthor watched in horrified fascination as energy readings that shouldn't exist outside of theoretical mathematics began building in the ship's main weapon array. The lava lamp quantum matrix pulsed with anticipation, while the rubber ducks in the sensor array began quacking in harmony with Thompson's guitar solo. You might want to close your eyes, Brooks advised the alien delegation. What you're about to see might permanently alter your understanding of cause and effect. Also, side effects may include existential crisis and a sudden urge to take up interpretive dance. As the Paradox's main weapon powered up, Zelthor couldn't help but notice that every human crew member was grinning. It was the kind of grin that suggested they were about to do something that would make the universe seriously reconsider its position on what was and wasn't possible. And somehow, that grin was more terrifying than the 3 Drachnid warships combined. The reality hiccup cannon fired with a sound that Selthor's brain refused to process. It wasn't so much a sound as it was the auditory equivalent of someone trying to divide by 0 while juggling quantum uncertainties. Direct hit, shouted the tactical officer from the bridge. Or maybe not. Actually, I think we hit them yesterday. Through the viewport, Selthor watched as the lead Drachnid warship simultaneously existed in 3 different locations, none of which seemed particularly pleased about the situation. Its quantum-hardened shields, designed to withstand the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, were currently trying to defend against an attack that had technically happened last Tuesday. Their shields are attempting to compensate, Vectera reported, reading from her backup scanner. They're trying to reconfigure to block the attack, but they can't seem to figure out when it's happening. That's the beauty of temporal coffee physics, Brooks explained while casually adjusting what appeared to be a kaleidoscope connected to the weapons system. Can't block an attack if you can't pin down when it exists. Mike, give me something progressive rock. We need to destabilize their reality matrix. Ensign Thompson launched into a complex guitar solo that somehow incorporated 7 different time signatures simultaneously. The Paradox's shield harmonics pulsed in sync, creating what Brooks called a probability bubble around the ship. Drachnid vessels attempting to lock weapons. Came the alert from Tactical. Perfect timing. Captain Morrison's voice held far too much enthusiasm for someone being targeted by the galaxy's most advanced warships. Lieutenant Brooks initialized the rubber duck maneuver. AI, Captain. Releasing the ducks. To Excelthor's eternal confusion, the sensor array began launching what appeared to be ordinary rubber ducks into space. The small yellow toys spun blazily in the void, completely ignored by the Drachnid targeting systems, until they started to quack. The quacks propagated through space in impossible patterns, creating interference waves that caused the Drachnid targeting computers to receive coordinates that existed somewhere between reality and a children's bedtime story. Their return fire passed through spaces where the Paradox had been, would be, and never was, all at the same time. They're trying to adapt, Brooks announced, her fingers flying over her console. Time for Plan B. Initiating the espresso protocol. The antimatter containment field coffee makers began brewing at speeds that should have caused a localized collapse of spacetime. Instead, they produced what Brooks called a quantum foam cappuccino, a bubble of pure chaos that surrounded the Paradox like a caffeinated shield of impossibility. "Ma'am," one of the engineering crew called out, "the reality distortion field is approaching critical whimsy." Perfect. Maintain power to the lava lamps and prepare for a perception jig. The Paradox executed a series of maneuvers that made Excelthor question everything he knew about spacecraft dynamics. The ship pirouetted through its own wake, leaving behind a trail of temporal eddies that caused the pursuing Drachnid vessels to temporarily forget which way was up. "Their quantum computers are crashing," Tactical reported gleefully. "They're getting blue screens of death in space. Time to end this," Morrison commanded. Brooks, ready the logic bomb. "But sir," Vectera interjected, her scientific horror overwhelming her diplomatic training, "you can't seriously be planning to." "Already done," Brooks announced cheerfully, dumping an entire pot of triple-shot espresso into what looked suspiciously like a modified snow globe. Releasing the Paradox cascade. Now, the resulting phenomenon defied description in any known language. The nearest Drachnid ship found itself trying to process a weapon that worked because it couldn't work, powered by coffee that simultaneously was and wasn't decaf, guided by rubber ducks that rejected the basic premises of duckhood. All 3 enemy vessels hung motionless in space, their crews presumably trying to reboot their understanding of fundamental reality. Their engine cores, the pride of Drachnid engineering, had apparently decided to take the rest of the day off to contemplate the meaning of existence. In the battle's aftermath, Commander Thomas "Lucky" Reynolds found Excelthor and his team huddled in the observation lounge, surrounded by malfunctioning scientific instruments and empty cups of reactor-brewed coffee. The aliens had the shell-shocked look of beings who had witnessed reality itself throw up its hands and walk off the job. "I suppose you have questions," Reynolds said, settling into a chair that somehow occupied 3 different quantum states at once, a lingering effect of the reality hiccup cannon. "Questions?" Vectera's voice modulator cracked. "Questions implying the possibility of answers. What we witnessed defies answering. It defies everything." Reynolds smiled, pulling out what appeared to be an old-fashioned pocket watch that occasionally ticked backwards. "That's where you're wrong. Everything we do has an explanation. It's just not the kind of explanation you're used to. But the laws of physics, Selthor began, are more like guidelines, Reynolds interrupted, holding up his hand. See, that's the fundamental difference between your approach and ours. You look at the universe and see rigid laws that must be obeyed. We look at the same universe and see loopholes waiting to be exploited. He gestured toward the window, where the Drachnid ships were still floating in a state of existential confusion. Their crews had apparently requested a timeout to rewrite their physics textbooks. Take our coffee maker antimatter containment system, Reynolds continued. Everyone knows antimatter needs complex magnetic fields and perfect vacuum conditions to be contained, right? But has anyone ever actually asked the antimatter what it wants? Asked the antimatter. One of the junior analysts looked ready to faint. Metaphorically speaking, Reynolds clarified, we discovered that antimatter responds to quantum resonance patterns in ways nobody expected. The steam from brewing coffee just happens to create the perfect resonance frequency. The fact that it also keeps the crew caffeinated is just a bonus. He pulled out a tablet displaying complex equations that somehow incorporated both advanced quantum mechanics and coffee bean roasting temperatures. Everything we do is based on actual science. We just approach it from unexpected angles. But the rubber ducks, Vectera whispered, still traumatized by the quacking. Ah, yes. Reynolds brightened. See, conventional sensor arrays are designed to detect specific energy signatures. But what if you could create a detection system based on what isn't there? The ducks generate a field of pure absurdity. They're so obviously out of place that they create a sort of reality contrast that makes cloaked ships stand out like sore thumbs. And the guitar-based shield harmonics. Music is just organized waves of probability when you think about it, Reynolds explained. We found that certain chord progressions can stabilize quantum fields in ways that traditional generators can't. Plus, it's much more fun than typing in shield frequency codes. Zelthor's primary brain was beginning to grasp a pattern, even as his secondary brain was still trying to file for retirement. You're saying that all of this, the impossible maneuvers, the reality-bending weapons, the temporal coffee physics, it's all actually based on real scientific principles. Exactly. Reynolds beamed. We didn't break physics. We just stopped treating it like an immutable set of rules and started treating it like a puzzle to be solved. Sometimes the solution involves coffee makers and rubber ducks, but that doesn't make it any less valid. He stood up, straightening his uniform. The universe isn't as rigid as most species think. It's got a sense of humor, if you know where to look for it. Humanity's greatest strength isn't that we ignore the rules. It's that we're willing to push them, bend them, and occasionally convince them to take a coffee break. Vectera looked down at her failed scanning device, then back up at the still grinning human commander. I believe, she said slowly, we may need to reconsider our entire approach to scientific advancement. That's the spirit, Reynolds replied. Now, who wants to see how we use cat videos to stabilize wormholes? The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so chaotic. Thousands of years of established scientific principles were unraveling faster than a quantum string in a cat's cradle. Zelthor stood at the central podium, his report hovering in holographic display, while hundreds of the galaxy's most prestigious scientists attempted to process what they were seeing. This recording must be fabricated, declared High Scientist Zixnor, their crystalline form vibrating with indignation. No vessel can execute a temporal loop using modified kitchen appliances. The footage is authentic, Zelthor replied, gesturing to Vectera, who activated another hologram. This shows the quantum resonance readings from the coffee maker antimatter containment system. As you can see. I refuse to see, interrupted another counselor, dramatically covering all three sets of their visual organs. The universe has rules. Laws. You cannot simply make physics take a coffee break. Vectera suggested, earning horrified gasps from the assembly. The chamber erupted into multiple arguments in 17 different languages. A group of quantum physicists in the upper gallery had begun trying to disprove their own existence. 3 of the council's leading theoretical mathematicians were huddled in a corner, attempting to develop a new numerical system that could properly express their level of distress. Order. The Grand Arbiter's voice boomed through the chamber. We will maintain scientific decorum. Chief Shipwright Excelfor, please continue with the weapons analysis. The next hologram showed the reality hiccup cannon in action. Several council members immediately began experiencing existential crisis. One particularly distinguished professor of temporal mechanics stood up, declared, "I quit," and walked out to become a professional finger painter. As you can see, Selthor continued, trying to ignore the sound of breaking paradigms. The human vessel's main weapon operates by creating a localized field of pure temporal paradox, powered by what they call triple-shot espresso with a twist of impossibility. But their power readings, protested another scientist. They're achieving 113% efficiency. That's impossible. Vectera finished. You might want to avoid using that word. The humans seemed to take it as a personal challenge. A hologram shifted to show Ensign Thompson's guitar-based shield harmonics. A group of quantum harmonics experts began crying softly. In the back of the chamber, someone had started a support group for displaced physics laws. We must classify this as a reality-bending anomaly, suggested one of the senior counselors. Clearly, this is a unique occurrence that... Actually, Zelthor interrupted, bringing up yet another hologram. The humans have offered to build more ships like the Paradox. They've already drawn up plans for an entire fleet, though they mentioned something about needing to stockpile coffee beans and rubber ducks first. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of a theoretical physicist quietly banging their head against their desk. Furthermore, Vectera added, they've expressed interest in sharing their technology. They've already proposed a joint engineering program, though they did mention we might want to loosen up our understanding of what constitutes proper scientific methodology. Loosen up. The Grand Arbiter's voice carried centuries of rigid scientific tradition. Science isn't something you loosen up. It's precise. Methodical. It's getting a bit boring, isn't it? Came a voice from the gallery. All eyes turned to Professor Yixtal, the council's oldest and most respected physicist. The ancient scientist adjusted their perception filters and continued, Perhaps we've become too rigid in our thinking, too bound by what we believe is impossible. But the laws of physics, someone began, are clearly more flexible than we imagined. Yixtal interrupted. Look at these humans, turning coffee makers into antimatter containment fields, using rubber ducks to detect cloaked ships, stabilizing quantum fields with rock music. They're not breaking the laws of physics. They're finding new ways to interpret them. And they're having fun doing it. The chamber fell silent as this radical notion sank in. In that silence, you could almost hear the sound of thousands of years of scientific dogma being quietly revised. 6 months after the historic vote, the first Galactic Human Joint Engineering Academy opened its doors. The campus, designed by a collaborative team of human and alien architects, somehow managed to exist in 5 dimensions while still maintaining proper cafeteria service in all of them. Lieutenant Amanda Brooks stood before the inaugural class, a diverse group of the galaxy's brightest minds, all eager to learn humanity's unique approach to physics. Behind her, Captain Morrison and Commander Reynolds were setting up what they called a practical demonstration, involving 3 coffee makers, a rubber duck, and what appeared to be a miniature black hole contained in a snow globe. Welcome to Advanced Theoretical Coffee Dynamics 101, Brooks began, writing on a holographic board that occasionally phased through its own existence. Today, we'll start with the basics. Why the universe's laws are more like polite suggestions, and how to convince quantum mechanics to take a lunch break. In the front row, Excelfor's youngest analyst, now a teaching assistant, was helping distribute what humans called starter kits, packages containing duct tape, paper clips, a basic quantum manipulator, and a gift card to the nearest coffee shop. Now, Brooks continued, who can tell me why conventional antimatter containment systems are unnecessarily complicated? She pointed to a crystalline being in the third row. Yes, the one having an existential crisis. Because we never considered asking the antimatter nicely. The student ventured, their crystalline structure vibrating with uncertainty. Exactly. Brooks beamed. 10 points to Quantum House. Now let's talk about how we can use this principle to build a warp drive out of a toaster and some rubber bands. At the back of the lecture hall, Vectera watched with growing amusement as the galaxy's next generation of engineers learned to see possibility where others saw only rules. Her own research team had already begun incorporating human methodologies, though she still hadn't quite recovered from watching them stabilize a quantum field using cat videos and dubstep music. The Academy's other classes were equally revolutionary. Down the hall, Ensign Thompson was teaching musical quantum harmonics and advanced power chords. In the experimental physics lab, a team of humans and aliens were attempting to create a temporal communication device using a modified karaoke machine and what they swore was a haunted lava lamp. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Professor Yixtal said, floating up beside Vectera. The ancient physicist had become one of the Academy's strongest supporters, even after an incident involving a quantum probability field and a malfunctioning coffee maker had temporarily turned them into a jazz musician. Beautiful. Vectera watched as Brooks demonstrated how to create a stable wormhole using nothing but a paperclip and the pure audacity of human engineering. "It's chaos." "Exactly," Yixtal agreed. "Beautiful chaos. Look at them. They're not just teaching engineering. They're teaching imagination. The ability to look at the impossible and say, why not?" In the lecture hall, Brooks was now explaining why the square root of -1 could be solved using interpretive dance and the right caffeinated beverage. Half the class was taking notes, while the other half seemed to be questioning their understanding of basic mathematics. "We were so focused on understanding the universe," Yixtal continued, "that we forgot to ask if the universe might enjoy a little creativity now and then. These humans, they didn't break physics. They just showed us that physics has a sense of humor." As if to prove their point, a small temporal anomaly popped into existence near the ceiling, raining rubber ducks onto the laughing students below. Brooks simply incorporated it into her lecture, using the ducks to demonstrate principles of quantum entanglement. Besides, Yixtal added with a chuckle, any species that can turn coffee makers into antimatter containment fields and defeat advanced warships with rubber ducks clearly has something to teach us about thinking outside the quantum box. Vectera nodded, watching as the next generation of the galaxy's scientists learned to embrace the impossible. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Thompson's advanced shield harmonics class practicing their power chords, their music rippling through reality itself. The universe, it seemed, had finally learned to laugh.